Aside from jetpacks and warp drives, the sci-fi technology that has most fascinated people over the years is probably invisibility. For whatever reason, people have been compelled for almost a century to speculate about how to make an invisibility cloak, and many have attempted to fool others into believing they have created one. So far, none of these claims have ever been proven true. Most of the time, stories revolve around a photo like this. In case there was any doubt, this is not real. This is a photography trick as old as cinema. All you need to make a shot like this yourself is a camera, a stable tripod, and some free photo editing software. However, over the past 10 years or so, there's been another claim floating around on the internet which does not follow this MO, and so far seems to have stood up to scrutiny. Our story begins in 2012 in an interview conducted by CNN Pentagon correspondent Chris Lawrence with the CEO of a camouflage company called Hyperstealth. Lawrence was covering a story about a botched supply of new camo gear to the US Army, in which the usual contractor had provided patterns that were judged totally unusable by Army personnel. In desperation, the Army had put out a public tender for camo patterns, and Guy Kramer, the CEO of a Canadian military equipment company, had answered their call. The interview started off fairly normally, with a discussion of what makes good camo patterns, but partway through, things took a bizarre turn.
What's coming up down the road, and very quickly, is the Harry Potter cloak.
What is it?
With that fictional cloak, Harry isn't just camouflage, he's invisible.
My body's gone.
How invisible are we talking here? If I walked into a room with a soldier wearing one of these cloaks,
You wouldn't see him at all. He would be completely invisible to you.
This isn't make-believe. The military has seen the so-called quantum stealth technology. It works by bending the light around an object, even concealing most of a person's shadow.
This was a much more interesting story than the one Lawrence had intended to film, and the whole item was retooled into a headline about how the US military would soon have invisible special forces, tanks, and jets. The story was a massive hit, being reported in almost every major news outlet across the globe. Kramer became an overnight sensation, with tech journalists speculating that he was about to become the next big tech billionaire. But pretty quickly, a controversy started around Kramer's invention. The critics were focused on this image, taken from Kramer's website and broadcast by CNN alongside the interview. Skeptics were quick to point out that this was just another iteration of the double exposure trick I showed earlier, and that Kramer was just another conman whose nonsense had been amplified by an incompetent reporter. Normally, this is where the story would end, but Kramer, as we'll soon discover, is nothing if not determined. In a sprawling online manifesto, Kramer claimed that CNN had gone and done a fake news. He accused them of taking photos from his website without permission and editing them to remove a disclaimer he had written, labeling the photos as mock-ups and not intending to represent the real product. CNN denied they had done this, but it seems plenty of people are happy to take the CNN lies excuse at face value. The photo in question is still available on Kramer's website, and it does not have the disclaimer as shown in his manifesto. I would go so far as to say that this correct version looks like a text box was hastily added in an almost comically incompetent attempt to save face. It also actually doesn't say the images were fakes, even though they clearly are, so it's not really a disclaimer at all. But Kramer did not leave it here. He began to offer video demonstrations of his technology. 2 videos in particular captured the public imagination. In one, a curved plastic screen is seen in front of a window. The background is slightly distorted, but nothing else seems amiss. However, as the camera pans up, it is revealed that a helmet was hidden behind the screen, totally invisible from the front. In another, even more famous video, a large screen is propped up against a wall. The screen shows a near-perfect image of the wall behind it, but a few seconds into the video, a shadow moves, and Kramer appears from behind it. Many saw this as a full vindication of Kramer, though it should be pointed out that both of these videos could potentially still be achieved using double exposure. As a final proof, Kramer gave a sample of his quantum stealth material to the morning news crew of CTV, who demonstrated it live, on air. For the first time, it looked like invisibility really had been discovered. But some of those pesky scientists still weren't happy. It was pointed out that this shiny plastic screen was very different to the Harry Potter cloak Kramer had promised, and many were keen for Kramer to explain how his technology worked and how it would be developed into something that was useful for the military. Kramer was reluctant to reveal the secret of his technology, stating only that it was a negative refractive index material based on quantum effects. This explanation drew immediate comparisons with the work of Imperial College physicist John Pendry, who had made a career out of studying what he called electromagnetic cloaking. This is an effect whereby certain metamaterials can be built which have patterns of conducting material at the nanoscale. Because of the size and spacing of these antennae, these materials can be used to hide a region of space from detection by bending light around an object such that no one from the outside would be able to see it. While Pendry's work is remarkable, he has always been careful to point out that these materials only work for a very narrow band of wavelengths and were unlikely to have the kind of macroscopic applications needed for the military. Many speculated that Kramer had invented some sort of advanced metamaterial, which built on Pendry's concept to cloak an object from all EM frequencies at the macroscopic scale. Indeed, Kramer claimed that Pendry had privately endorsed his product, even attributing this quote to him, though Pendry refused to confirm this in public. People loved the idea that an amateur inventor with no formal training in physics or engineering had achieved something that even the world's top professors had been unable to do. Kramer was keen to point out that this was actually a family tradition, since his grandfather, also an autodidact scientist, had invented the walkie-talkie. As compelling as the story seemed to be, many still wanted firm proof. They wanted to get the material into a lab and test it, but Kramer refused. He said that he was unable to give out samples since the material had been classified by the military. However, not long after the CNN interview, a reporter from his hometown, Maple Ridge, had conducted an interview with a member of Canadian Special Forces who said that they had no contract in place with Kramer and had declined to make use of the technology. In response, Kramer stated that he had met with US, not Canadian, Special Forces, and that they had said that they would classify quantum stealth, but could not, because Kramer was not a US citizen. He also claims that the US Army scientists were blown away by the technology and that they had told him the whole of physics would need to be rewritten. No one from the US Army has ever confirmed this version of events. Since the technology was not actually classified, there was now no need to hide it. In an interview with CTV, Kramer revealed that quantum stealth used a lenticular lens, something which a number of skeptics had already been speculating about online. A lenticular lens is not a quantum metamaterial. In fact, these lenses have been around for over 100 years. Also called a Lubor's lens, this is an array of columnar lenses lined up like the ridges on a washboard. Stacking lenses up like this produces some weird effects. The main application is in making 3D posters, but they can also be used to selectively distort certain parts of an image to create optical illusions. It is this effect which is the key to quantum stealth. I've put a few links to videos in the description which explain exactly how this illusion works. The main problem here is that this is nothing new. In fact, you can buy a lens like this from a joke shop for about $10 with instructions on how to use it to make a pencil disappear. When critics pointed this out, Kramer had an answer ready for them.
Yeah. So what we're doing is we're bending light with a lenticular lens, and version 1 is a very simplified version of the material. This is the same material you see in 3D books and DVD covers and movie posters, where by moving side to side, you actually get a 3D image. So we're using the same material, and we've removed the picture from behind it to get that effect. Now, we've got 13 different versions, and the patentable versions are version 2 and up.
Yes, this screen was just a Lubor lens, but there were 13 different versions of the material, and version 2 and up were the real breakthrough. When people asked to see version 2 and up, he explained he wouldn't show them to the public because of the danger that the technology would fall into the hands of criminals or terrorists. When asked if the other versions would be more like the Harry Potter cloak he had initially promised, Kramer claimed they were 80% of the way towards a wearable version, and that patents were pending on the technology. For many, this was enough. The story had been fun, but it was clear this was not going to turn them into the Predator anytime soon, and the story faded to the darkest and most gullible corners of the internet. Over the next few years, Kramer would periodically update his website, claiming that he had had secret meetings with almost every military in the English-speaking world. In every account, he is hailed as a super genius, and his material is met with awe, and yet not a single military organization made an order. The reasons given are often complex, involving spy rings, international intrigue, and precarious alliances between nations, which of course Kramer is always privy to. If anyone sensible had been watching, this would have been the warning sign that this company was run by a man with, at best, a very precarious grip on reality. Unfortunately, no one sensible was watching, only tech journalists. The story blew up again in 2019. In response to pressure from his shareholders, Kramer decided to make all 13 versions of Quantum Stealth public.
It was actually my shareholders that sat me down at an annual general meeting and said, "You've been promoting this material to the military since 2010. You've done 40 demonstrations around the world, and you haven't made a dime from this material."
Needless to say, there was no Harry Potter cloak here, and version 13 was much the same as version 1. In the meantime, the patent applications had also fallen through, with the feedback saying that there was no identifiable innovation here. This was the WIPO's tactful way of saying that you cannot whack a patent on a cheap piece of plastic you bought on eBay. Unfortunately, researching stories in full is not something paid journalists are very good at doing. Hundreds of stories appeared about the amazing stealth technology that was about to make the US Army invisible in outlets ranging from clickbait tech blogs up to The New Scientist and even The Telegraph. Huge numbers of tech YouTubers began to cover the story, with samples even being sent out for live testing. You can find a host of absolutely surreal videos online, where 20-something techies hold up a greasy piece of plastic, dripping vegetable oil onto their expensive microphones, and claim, with a straight face, that this is a revolutionary breakthrough in optics. All the attention revived Kramer's ambitions for quantum stealth, and he submitted hundreds of patents relating to the technology. In addition, he had since decided that this plastic sheet would also make the first holographic projector and solve the world's energy problems by amplifying the power of solar cells. Every single patent, unfortunately, was rejected. For a while, it seemed that would be where the story ended. The hype eventually settled down again, and Kramer's online activity dried up. By this point, he had given 10 years of his life to this project and risked his entire company on its success. None of his patents had been accepted, no one had bought the product. Time to call it a day. Surely. But that is not the entrepreneurial spirit. As of January 2021, this story has taken a darker turn. After a lengthy series of appeals, the WIPO has now granted 204 patents to Kramer on the basis of the quantum stealth technology. These patents are terrifyingly broad in scope, making vague allusions to ideas such as the use of a fluid-filled lens and manipulating a laser with a lens array. They cover the original stealth idea, but also the solar cell amplifier and the holographic technology. I am not a patent lawyer, but it seems to me that these patents will give Kramer the power to claim ownership of almost any innovation using lens arrays in almost any field of optics. He has also reneged on the simple Lubor lens explanation for how this technology works, latching onto a new discovery in optics from earlier this year, photon avalanches. Once again, he has claimed that a major academic in this field has endorsed him, this time Professor Schuch of Columbia University. When I reached out to Professor Schuch for comment, I unfortunately didn't get a reply, but judging by the fact that Kramer has lifted quotes directly from a press release about Schuch's latest Nature paper and framed them as discussions of quantum stealth, I think it is safe for me to assume that this endorsement is no more genuine than was Pendry's. At this point, let me do a little debunking. Because while this pattern of behaviour is certainly alarming and seems to have all the hallmarks of a scam, I have not actually addressed the so-called evidence that this technology works. As Kramer claims, these videos are not faked, but just because they aren't fake doesn't mean this isn't a hoax. Firstly, this is not a negative refractive index material. The main piece of evidence supplied to show this negative refractive index is that when an object is viewed through the lens, it moves backwards. But this is a property of any lens when placed at the right distance. You can replicate this with a glass of water. Pendry's negative refractive index materials need to be patterned at the nano scale, while the lenses in quantum stealth can easily be seen by the naked eye. Even if this was some exotic quantum metamaterial, this and any other claims that you could create a wearable stealth suit based on bending light are necessarily false. Consider this image, which Kramer said is what the final product might look like. For this to happen, in reality, light hitting the sheet would have to be curved around the body of the user, even when it is travelling through air. It would have to hit the ground and reflect back, curving back up to the screen. Then, when it emerges, it would have to suddenly jump to a path that was exactly the same as the one that the ray would have taken to the observer's eye if there was nothing there. If the user changed position, the focal point of the lens array would have to spontaneously change to prevent the image becoming distorted or blurred. Also, what happens when there is contact between the body and the sheet, or the body and the ground? How are the photons supposed to work their way between these points of contact without ever interacting with a person's body? However you view it, even if this were a quantum metamaterial, there is simply no way to make a wearable invisibility cloak a reality. That leaves us with the riot shield version of quantum stealth shown in Kramer's videos. But this product is not invisibility. Here are two side-by-side movies of a soldier in a ghillie suit and someone using quantum stealth. Who is more visible here? Even if you can't tell what is behind the screen, there is clearly something there, because the screen itself is as obvious as, well, a great big plastic sheet covered in vegetable oil. In his discussions of his original camo patterns, Kramer discusses how important it is to break up the silhouette of an individual and create the impression of depth and shadow. This riot shield does none of those things. I genuinely worry that a large proportion of the human race may be severely delusional if they can look at this and say that it is a breakthrough in stealth. The psychology of what has happened here is both hilarious and frightening. Journalists and bloggers used to reporting on industry disruptors who do seemingly impossible things with advanced technology happily took this at face value without ever asking for a second opinion from a real scientist or even doing basic background research. If you Google this, within a few hours you can find all the information that I have shown you. The rambling manifestos, the fake endorsements, the comments on blogs, the whole weird story. And yet, not even paid journalists bothered to put the larger picture together. As the internet amplified this story, it has turned into a kind of Emperor's New Clothes scenario, such that people will actually get quite angry if you question whether quantum stealth is truly a breakthrough. After a century of science achieving the impossible, it now seems that many people are happy to accept anything as true, so long as it has the word quantum in front of it. It is great that faith in science is so strong, but it's terrible that people can't separate things like this from genuine technology. In the world of fake news, we have become practiced at debunking conspiracy theories and pseudoscience. You can find people who make entire careers out of taking down flat earthers, homeopaths, quantum healing, or David Icke, but the most dangerous con artists don't sit at such extremes. Those who present the biggest threat to science sit on the fuzzy line between truth and lies, selling people something that sounds like science, looks like science, feels like science, but is not science. You may think that Kramer and Hyperstealth are harmless, and they seem to be so far. But we don't have to imagine what could happen if the hype train hitched itself to someone more insidious. Theranos, Surgisphere, and OneCoin have cost people billions, diverted public research funds, harmed the vulnerable, and torn open cracks in the legal and professional standards that are supposed to protect people against fake science. These con artists are getting bolder, empowered by a toxic combination of the media's supreme faith in tech and near total scientific illiteracy. The only way to stop it is if scientists themselves are bold enough to confront this when it appears. During the 10 years that Hyperstealth has been floating around, I have not seen anyone else piece this story together in full. I understand why. It's obvious that Flat Earth is nonsense, so going after it can only make you look good. But when something like this hovers on that fuzzy boundary, you are genuinely sticking your neck out if you call it out. But scientists can't be afraid to challenge things just because we're scared to be wrong. If we demur our responsibility to hold the thin line between truth and lies, we have no right to call ourselves scientists at all.
The pinnacle of camouflage, we knew going into this was going to be something that could not only hide you in any environment, but also mask your movement behind whatever it is that ended up becoming the solution.
They could actually pull out, very similar to what they carry with a survival blanket, throw it over top of them. And unless you walked right into them, you wouldn't know that they were there.
We're not trying to pull the wool over people's eyes with this. So we've actually made a number of big discoveries in this optical field in the last year or two. It's off-the-shelf material.
This technology has been around for decades.
This is the same material you see in 3D books and DVD covers and movie posters.
This is as close to magic, I would assume, as you can get.
We've got 13 different versions, and the patentable versions are version 2 and up. A lot of people are getting very excited about what they're seeing with version 1, and I have to say that version 2, though, is the big deal here.
Guy shared with me how to make the prototype for version 2, which is 2 pieces of version 1 back to back.
It's off-the-shelf material.
By this point, the military applications of the technology are clear.
I'd probably given an extra 2 years to the military that they didn't deserve to try and vet this. You haven't made a dime from this material. It's time to secure the intellectual property before someone else does, and it's time to commercialize this and take it to market.
So far, Hyperstealth has filed patents for more than a dozen different versions, each with its own unique optical properties.
We've got the solar patent, we've got the light bending patent, we've got a laser splitting patent where I can split a laser into millions of parts, which can be used for LiDAR, which are lasers that operate like radars, and they're used on self-driving cars. So it's off-the-shelf material. My guess is we're probably looking at a year or less before we start to have commercially viable or military viable products. Will we achieve full invisibility with this, I can't say yes or no.
Humans really can't see what's going on.
Because of the success of science, there is a kind of, I think, a kind of pseudoscience that they follow the forms. You gather data, you do so and so forth, but they don't get any laws. Haven't found out anything. They haven't gone anywhere yet. Maybe someday they will, but it's not very well developed. But what happens is, at an even more mundane level, we get experts on everything that sound like they're sort of scientific. There's all kinds of myths and pseudoscience all over the place. Now, I might be quite wrong. Maybe they do know all this thing. But I don't think I'm wrong. See, I have the advantage of having found out how hard it is to get to really know something, how careful you have to be about checking the experiments, how easy it is to make mistakes and fool yourself. I know what it means to know something. And therefore, I see how they get their information. And I can't believe that they know it. They haven't done the work necessary, haven't done the checks necessary, haven't done the care necessary. I have a great suspicion that they don't know, that this stuff is, don't know, and they're intimidating people by it. I think so. I don't know the world very well, but that's what I think.